My dearly beloved brothers and sisters and young people and all who are gathered, both here and elsewhere. Today, my talk is entitled Speak to the Rock, which might sound very strange, but hopefully as we go through this, you'll realise that we're actually asked to have a conversation with the rock. You know, rocks and stones are ubiquitous in our lives. Women wear rocks on their hands, sort of around their earring, have earrings, brooches, all sorts of stuff. Where we find ourselves in a building that's largely made of rock. And yet we don't see it. It's all around us. It's so ubiquitous that we just don't see the rock around us. You know, I remember as a little boy when my dad told me about the petrified forest, the petrified wood. And he said, that used to be wood, but it's now turned to stone. It's changed. It's one of my early childhood memories that puzzled me for a long time. And when I was in my teenage years, my family and I went to the northwest of Western Australia, and we came to a place where this beautiful rock, which had been hidden, came to light. And that rock was called Tiger's Eye or Tiger Eye. And we were amazed at that. Incredible. It's like petrified asbestos in a way, because it's got those strands in it. But you can see why it's called a tiger eye, because it looks kind of shiny and attractive, and something amazing about it. So we were up there, and we all had our little hammers, and every time the car would stop, we'd pile out and bang on rocks next to the side of the road, or at the side of the road. They were covered in dust, but some of these rocks we smashed open had a thing of beauty inside that had never been seen before, never been available to the human eye ever before. And we ended up taking sackloads of rocks back down to Perth afterwards. My dad, I think, borrowed a tumbler from somewhere and put carborundum in it, and this thing was going, it had a washing machine motor in it, with it, and this thing was going day and night, 7 days a week. And little by little, these little chunks of rock became kind of like smoothed off, like water-washed stones. And then, of course, it puts a lacquer on it. My mum bought clasps and things, and poor unfortunate friends and family got little gifts for a long time after that. But we enjoyed ourselves, and we had seen it from nothing, from something that was hidden to the human eye, to something that people hopefully would wear proudly, with a lot of work. A little later in our travels, we went up to Queensland, and we also collected what's called a thunder egg. And my mum brought this in for me today. The outside of it just looks like an ordinary rock, but inside it glitters. It's got those crystals in it, and it's a beautiful thing. And it sort of reminds you that God is working with us to make us those jewels. And in the last days, He will collect His jewels and proudly display them and proudly have them as part of His throne. But at the moment, these jewels are a little bit hidden. But inside, things can actually change and develop. My love of rocks, that's a very blurry photograph, I realise, but that's me and someone else standing there inside a cave. We went and climbed through this little hole in the ground and saw these beautiful formations inside this cave, once again hidden from the human eye. And we are very blessed, aren't we, that in South Australia we have the caves down south all over the place. There's caves on the Nullarbor. In fact, we went down through what was called the Wee Bubby Cave near Eucla with the berries, and the water in that cave, because it was kind of like pretty dark, we didn't know there was water there until someone stepped into it. It was so clear. So there's amazing things that are hidden from the human eye. So, and also, here's a little picture of the Wee Bubby Cave. The water, you can't really tell where it stops and starts. And then again, last year, I'd never been to Uluru, but it was always comforting to know that in the middle of Australia was this enormous rock that kind of brings people together. People come from all over the world to see this rock. So there is something about rocks and stones that are kind of catch the eye. And so today we're going to have a little walk through the scriptures and have a look, have a little journey, have a little adventure, having a look at the rocks and stones that are talked about in the scriptures, and these I think of sort of as God's stepping stones to the kingdom. So we've just read this chapter, Exodus 17, where we read that where God says, "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb." Well, we're told a couple of chapters on that they moved from Rephidim over to Horeb, so I'm not really sure what that kind of entails, but there's something tricky going on. But anyway, God says, "I'll stand before you there on the rock of Horeb, and you shall smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it." So Moses listened to what God said, and as we know, he struck that rock and out flowed the water. Now, if it wasn't for Paul, you might think that I'm drawing a long straw here by saying that that rock was Christ. But Paul tells us very emphatically exactly what it was. And Daniel referred to this a few Sundays ago. So he says, "I don't want you to be ignorant that our forefathers all passed under the cloud, and they all passed through the sea. They were all baptised into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate of the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, and they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ." You see there that the word accompanied. As they went through, it would seem that the pillar of fire and of cloud at night, at day and night, moved with them, or they moved where it moved, but the rock accompanied them as well, which is a very strange thing. So in other words, what we're being told there is that that rock, which was Christ, was accompanying the people in the wilderness. So they would have awoken in the morning, and not only would they have had the bread from heaven, but the water from the rock. So Jesus Christ was there with them day by day by day. But they had to listen to the instructions, because if they didn't take the right amount of manna, of bread, in the morning, then there might be trouble. They might not have enough for the Sabbath, or if they collected too much, there'll be problems as well. So it's about listening to the Word of God and coming to Him and listening to what He has to say. Now, the other thing there is that in this chapter, when Moses struck the rock, and the rock was Christ, and out came the water, what are we reminded of? We're reminded of Jesus being, after his death actually, where he was pierced, he was struck, and out flowed the water of life, mingled with his blood. And that's what we are coming to here today to celebrate, partaking of his blood. Because we know that, as Peter said, he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. We're also shown in this chapter that, towards the end, that Moses and Aaron climbed the hill, and while Moses had his hands up in the air, then Joshua was winning against the enemy, Amalek. But as soon as his hands got heavy and they started going down, Amalek started winning the battle. So what did they do? Moses' hands grew heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady. Now, stone, rock, let's say that rock was Christ. There's Jesus crucified with a man either side of him, allowing victory over the enemy. An amazing thing. And in Exodus 19, just a few chapters on, we're told that Moses, this is the beginning of going up the mount to get the 10 Commandments. And Moses went up to God, and Yahweh called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you will say to the house of Jacob, and you will tell the Israelites, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and I brought you to me. And now, if you will carefully listen to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be a treasured possession for me out of all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, but you will belong to me as the kingdom of priests and holy nation. These are the words that I will speak to the Israelites." How about that? So God's saying, if you carefully listen to what I say, you will be a treasured possession. And what does that remind us of? In Malachi, "And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels." That's what God is saying. At that time, if we carefully listen and communicate with the rock, with God and with Jesus, then we are jewels that will be God's when he makes up his jewels. Now, getting back to Moses going up that mount, obviously the tablets were made of stone, and the strange thing happened about that because I don't mean it to be disrespectful, but the first person to break all 10 commandments was Moses himself. He's a bit of an angry man sometimes. He killed an Egyptian, and a bit later on when we look at the other part about God says speak to the rock and he smites it, Moses had a bit of a temper on him. But then again, God said that he was angry with Israel for 40 years. So, there was a bit of anger going around. When we read the accounts, because it's interspersed, the account of Moses going up to collect the commandments twice, we actually, if you count how many times Moses goes up there, it looks like it's 7 times, or it might be 8. There's one area that might be double up, not sure. But at least 7 times Moses went up and down and up and down and up and down. What was he doing? He was the mediator between God and man. He was a type of Jesus Christ. He was listening to what God was saying, and he was talking to the people of Israel. He was listening to what they said, and he was going back up to see the Lord again. And in amongst all of that, in Exodus 24, when Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. How amazing is that? They looked maybe through a translucent floor of something that represented heaven. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet a pavement of stone. And so in Revelation, when we hear of the 12 stones, they're representing the eternity of God, which is what it represents, that God is eternal. Things pass away, but God has his feet, as it were, on a pavement of sapphire stone. We can only imagine what that might have looked like. Lapis Lazuli, I think it is in the original, for those who know their rocks and stones. And so this is what God said to Moses. Said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you and will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious and will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. So this is when Moses said, show me your glory. And God said, well, I can't show you my glory. I can show you my glory, but I can't show you my face. So what did God do? What did God do that involved the rock? The Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock when my glory passes by, and I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face shall not be seen. What would that have been like? Moses in the cleft and God passing before him with that glory going. It must have been an amazing sight. And then, where am I here? And then Moses sings about the rock as well in the Song of Moses at the end of his life. These are some of his final words. He's talking about, he's asking the heavens to listen to him, and he's talking to God in prayer. And not just in prayer, but in song. Give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak. And hear, O earth, the words of my mouth, that my doctrine shall drop down as the rain, my speech shall distill as dew, as the small rain upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass, because I will publish the name of the Lord. Ascribe ye greatness unto our God. He is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is he. And in Deuteronomy 32, the rock is mentioned a number of times. He emphasises, he keeps talking about the fact that God has solid promises which he will fulfil, and our part of it is that we need to listen and talk to the rock, whose ways are perfect. Now let's move back to Numbers 20, where Moses is instructed to speak to the rock, which we alluded to earlier. So here he's told, take the rod and gather thou the assembly together, and Aaron thy brother, and speak to that rock before their eyes, and I will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so that they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of the rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses, because you did not trust me enough to honour me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you did not bring this community into the land I give them. So God doesn't say outright, it's because you struck the rock twice. He says, it's because you believed me not. You heard my words, you didn't believe me. You didn't trust me enough to honour me in the eyes of the children of Israel. It's amazing how this theme develops when you start looking at the rocks and stones in the Bible. It's all about trusting, listening to, believing God. So Moses, in a way, damaged the archetype of Jesus. Jesus is the one, yes, crucified the first time, and out comes the water. But symbolically, the second time when we talk to Jesus in prayer, he will give us the water of eternal life, the water of healing. So I'm just going to go on a little side trip here and talk about Joshua. This is an interesting passage because at the end of Joshua's life, Joshua set up a rock, and we're told this about it. He had made a covenant with Israel and went back and forth and back and forth. No, we'll do the right thing, Joshua. No, I'm not sure if you will. Yeah, we will. And then we're told this in verse 27. Joshua said to all the people, behold, this stone that I'm setting up here shall be a witness unto us. For it hath heard all the words of the Lord which he spake unto us. It shall be therefore a witness unto you, lest you deny your God. So every time that they saw that rock that was set up as a pillar, as a memorial, they would have to remember that it was a witness to their promise to God. Not only that, it had heard the words of the Lord which he spake unto us. And then a little bit further on our side trip, before we come back to the Old Testament, Jesus also says this, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. This was at the end of the Beatitudes. He has given us jewels. This is how you build your house. These are the jewels which sparkle in the eyes of God. And we can also see this, a similar passage, but the recording in Luke 6 it says, everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts upon them, I will show you whom he is like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation upon the rock. So Jesus is saying, you need to listen, you need to act upon my words. And then you'll be like the person who's digging down to the foundation. So let's, talking about Mount Horeb, as we were, or Sinai, same thing. Years later, after Moses and the people of Israel were there, Elijah went to Horeb. He fled to Horeb, and he hid in a cave, we're told. And we know about this incident, that he was in this cave and there was a fierce wind, there was an earthquake, there was a fire, and then there was the still small voice. There was the quiet whisper. So we're once again, here is a man in a cave at the same place, Horeb, where he is reminding us that we need to listen to the gentle whisper and to speak to the rock. In other words, don't forget the power of prayer. Now, David frequently talked about God in his life as a rock. For instance, Psalm 18, the Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. David knew that through and through. He wasn't just saying that figuratively. He knew he actually owed his life to the rocks, because we're told that when Saul was after him, he departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him, and every one that was in distress, and every one that was in debt, and every one that was discontented gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. So they were hiding in the caves. And then there was a bit of news. Saul did a bit of investigation and found out where David might have been, and he was hopping between caves. And we remember the part where, they were hidden in the cave, and Saul came to the front of the cave, and David could have done him. Another time he crept out and cut a little piece off his garment, which he actually regretted afterwards. David found refuge in the rocks, literally, which is an amazing thing, isn't it? And David also says, this is from Psalm 95, David says, "Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation." Or in full, "O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to him with psalms." Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation, we are being told. And David did that because he knew that he owed his life, his very life. And later on in his life, when his son was across the other side of the valley pinging stones at him, he might have thought about what was going on with rocks and stones in his life. And he also, in Psalm 95, says this, "Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah and as at the day of Massah in the wilderness." Obviously, this is talking about the people grumbling before Moses gave them the water. And this, Paul takes this up in Hebrews 3, where he says, "See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God, but encourage one another as long as it's called today, so that none of you may be hardened like rock by sin's deceitfulness. We have come to share in Christ if indeed we hold our original conviction firmly to the end." So not just listening, but believing, and believing in to the end. And then he says in Hebrews, "Remember what it says today, when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled. And who was it who rebelled against God, even though they heard his voice? Wasn't it the people Moses led out of Egypt?" And there's a beautiful passage in 2 Corinthians. "Clearly, you are a letter from Christ showing the result of our ministry among you. This letter is written not with pen and ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. It is carved not on tablets of stone, but on human hearts." You see there that we're told about God being a living God in both of these places. Well, where are we going to go from there? Let's go here. When Jesus asked his disciples, "Who say people that I am?" Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." In other words, you've been listening to God and you believe. "And I say unto you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. What's Jesus saying? Yes, he is playing on words with Peter's name. And yes, he is sort of saying that he's building his church on Peter. But not altogether, because, Peter's not that much of a rock really. I think what he's saying is that he's building his church on the living God and on people who listen to that living God and believe it. That's really, I think, what that verse is telling us. Because, just a few verses later, Jesus began to explain how he's going to go up to Jerusalem and he would suffer and die. And Peter gets him to one side and says, no, that never, Lord. This will never happen to you. And Jesus turned to him and said, get thee behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block. So if Jesus is talking about building his church on the stone, well, so be it. But this stone is mortal and makes a few mistakes, and he's being rebuked that he's like a stumbling block. And Peter takes this up in 1 Peter chapter 2. Now to you who believe, this stone is precious. But to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone, and a stone that causes men to stumble and fall, that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined to. So Peter's having a bit of poke at himself right there. He's going, I know, I remember. I'll never forget that time when Jesus said, on this rock I will build my church. Now he's going, I remember also that I was a bit of a stumbling block. But who's he addressing? Now to you who believe, this stone is precious. And you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, that you may proclaim the excellence of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvellous light. So we're actually asked to proclaim his excellence. Now, getting towards the time when we partake of the bread and the wine. So let's think about Jesus on that cross. When we're told this, Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from top to bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose. So here we have the healing waters, when the rocks rent, and out come the sanctified ones, those who believe. They arise from the dead. This is what we're being told in this passage. And then, of course, after that, when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, or if you're American, sepulchre. So here we're told that Jesus is in a new tomb hewn out of the living rock, in which no other person had been laid, and across it goes the great stone. But Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And he who believes in Jesus will live even though he dies, Jesus tells us. That is the promise, because that stone was rolled away and Jesus came out of the tomb, and that is our great hope. And so I hope that in the short time we've had together, we can think on the amazing message of listening to the rock and speaking to the rock, and think about the future of this earth, where God says, "They shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels."